So we're back with the lunatics at Stand to Reason, where head crazy Greg Koukl is going to try to explain why Christian faith is somehow not insane. But he's wrong. Believing anything for bad reasons, no matter what kind of irrational spin you put on it, is insanity, and that perfectly describes people who don't even understand their own religious book. But what do you expect? So, let's get going as Greg wonders if faith requires God to be hidden. No, it just requires you to be irrational.
There's a fairly popular notion going around that in order to have real faith, God must be hidden.
And that's a silly notion indeed. The fact is, faith is probably the worst intellectual position one can take. You should have faith in nothing, at least as described by most religions. Positions held on faith are completely intellectually indefensible. They demand no evidence, and they verify no conclusions. They're pure emotion based on wishful thinking and irrational feelings. So my question isn't, does God have to hide to have faith? It's, why in the world would you want to have faith in the first place?
This is not just a notion that Christians have. They'll say, for example, if you have all this evidence for God, then where is room for faith? But it also is the kind of the way the standard atheist nowadays is defining faith. Faith is what you use when you have no reasons, okay?
Seriously, this guy says okay a lot, doesn't he? It's a verbal crutch for people who are incapable of properly explaining themselves. But to get back to what Greg was saying, faith is what you use when you have no good reasons. In fact, the dictionary definition says exactly the same thing. Faith is strong belief in God or in the doctrines of a religion based on spiritual apprehension rather than proof. Since there's no reason to take spiritual apprehension seriously, faith is belief where you got no proof. Okay?
Now, look it, people can define faith however they want for their own purposes.
Not and maintain any kind of intellectual integrity. Words mean things for a reason. They facilitate communication. If you can just make up your own definition for any word at any time, they have violated the ability to communicate between individuals. So, no, you cannot.
But if you're talking about Christian faith, you got to let Christianity define it. And that is not the way the biblical record characterizes faith. That faith only works when God is completely hidden.
Funny, because it is. Now let's go straight to Hebrews 11:1, where it says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see." So the Bible agrees with us that faith is about wishful thinking and believing in things for which we have no evidence. Do these people not read their own Bible?
Let me ask you a question. Was God hidden when the Red Sea was parted by his power?
No. Assuming that ever happened, something for which you have no evidence of. So, if it happened, the people who were there would have a reason to believe what they saw with their own two eyes. They wouldn't have had faith. They would have been operating on objectively demonstrable facts. But you weren't there. You have no reason other than your wishful thinking and the unsubstantiated account in a book of mythology to believe that it ever happened. You have faith, and your faith is completely irrational.
Was God hidden when there was a pillar of fire that guided the Hebrews by night and a pillar of cloud by day?
Again, if you had been there and seen that, you wouldn't have been operating on faith, but on fact. But modern Christians just assume that these things happened at all based on myths and legends and hopes and dreams. There is a significant difference here that you are entirely missing.
Was God hidden when Jesus was standing there appealing for people's trust in him as Messiah while he worked miracles, feeding 5,000, raising the dead, healing the sick, raising himself from the dead.
Can you prove that any of that actually happened with more than your own wishful thinking? No? That's what I thought.
I mean, these are powerful manifestations of the presence and the reality of God.
These are claims made about the presence and reality of God that you've got no way to validate or verify. And that's why you have to turn to faith, because you've got no good reason to take any of it seriously.
That were all the foundations for people's faith.
Which only goes to show that people's faith is unfounded and irrational. You're basing your beliefs on unproven stories, unjustifiable myths, and emotional comfort. I don't care what you believe. I care why you believe and whether or not you can verify the things that you believe actually happened. And even you agree that you can't. You just believe because it makes you feel good. That's stupid.
In fact, John said that the reason he wrote the entire Gospel of John, and you can read this in John chapter 20, he said many other signs and wonders, these are miracles, Jesus performed that are not written in this book. And he says later, if all of those had been written, they would have filled the books of the world. But many other things he performed, I haven't included in this book, but the things that I have included, that is the evidence of the miracles of Jesus, he says, I've included in order that you would believe. That's faith, right?
And that might make sense for someone like John, who was supposedly there to see the miracles with his own two eyes. But for you, someone living 2,000 years later, it's just an account in a book which you can't verify in any way. For all you know, it was all just made up. So why would you want to believe something that you can't show is reasonable to accept in the first place? Especially when there are thousands of other religions out there making the same kind of claims in their own unsupported religious books that you simply reject because they don't give you the same kind of warm fuzzy. Why accept one and reject the others if you want to pretend to be rational?
That Jesus is the Son of God and the Messiah, and in believing, have life in his name.
All of which are just empty claims that cannot be backed up with objectively verifiable evidence. How is this any better than believing that Thor is the son of Odin and he will bring thunder and lightning and rain if only you have faith?
There you go. What could be more obvious?
That you're delusional? Not much. That you're engaged in wishful thinking over reasonable evaluation of the evidence? That much is obvious. Why? Was there some confusion here?
So when Christians say faith only works when God is hidden, they're not understanding the text.
You mean the text I read just a few minutes ago? Because your own ridiculous religious book defines faith exactly that way. But it gets in the way of your narrative, so you just don't like it. And your personal preference is all that your religious faith is based on, after all.
When atheists say faith only is legitimate when you have no evidence, this is self-serving.
I don't think anyone says legitimate. Faith only exists when you have no evidence. Your own book says that much. Faith is completely irrational. Faith is only necessary when you got nothing to base it on. If you had evidence, you could just show that the things you believe are reasonable. You wouldn't need faith, would you?
Because this is just a way of pigeonholing Christianity and Christian faith as having no evidence, because that's the way they've defined faith. It isn't what the book teaches.
Then I guess Hebrews 11:1 doesn't exist, huh? Because that's absolutely what the book teaches. And to be honest, atheists don't just say this about Christians, but about all theists, because all theists suffer from the same common delusion and irrational position that believing something without objective support is somehow a good thing. If you completely wiped faith from the face of the planet, there would be no more religion of any kind, because all religion relies on blind, unsupported, unjustified faith.
Look at reason believes, faith trusts.
Trust based on what? Because I have no reason to trust the things said in the Bible. I have no reason to take most of it seriously at all. So why do you trust it? Why should I trust it? Because you want to believe it's true. Wishes and dreams and delusion are the signs of an unwell mind and an irrational person.
Let me say it again. Reason gives us substance to believe that something is true. Our faith is an act of trust in that which we have good reason to believe is so.
Then why can you never present those good reasons? Because those good reasons, if they're actually good reasons, would be called evidence, and we all know you got none of that. You have emotional reasons that you want to think these things are true, but only an irrational fool would leap from wishful thinking to actual belief without a shred of objective support.
That's biblical faith.
That's emotional absurdity. And that's all the religious have, no matter what religion we're talking about. Rational people simply do not operate that way. They do not accept things based on emotion that have no objectively verifiable evidence to back them up. And that goes for believing in things like Bigfoot or the Loch Ness Monster too. Just because you want to believe they're real, just because people have written supposed accounts of these things over the years, that isn't sufficient reason to believe that they actually exist in the real world. And the same thing goes for gods. Just wanting them to be there doesn't mean they are. Just wanting to believe the accounts of gods doesn't mean those accounts are valid. It takes more than that, and anyone who refuses to go the extra mile and only believe what is demonstrably so, those people have something wrong with them. And that's why stands against reason is such a laughingstock. That's why they hide in their safe space, because they're ridiculous, and I think they know it. But they make money pushing this emotionally coddling nonsense, so they're going to keep on looking foolish. What a bunch of lunatics.